Excuse me, got cut off there accidentally. Let's begin. Took a ship. Actually, let's start from the last sentence down here. Our sentence is, the Igbo are a people called Hebrews. They were led by a man with the name Eddie. There were troubles in their original home, so they took a ship and sailed down the Omambala River, tributary of the Niger. Eddie was chief. On crossing the Omambala River into Igbo land, he settled and established his government. They came from the place where sacrifices are made. They are related to Israel. Hebrews and Israel are brothers. Originally, their name was Hebrew, but after crossing the river, they changed it to Igbo or Igbo. The Nri are often described as the most important keepers of Igbo traditions, responsible for performing rituals of purification among other Igbo clans. The clan is considered to carry the Levite practices evoked by the English missionary George Baston in his book Among the Igbos of Nigeria, 1921. Baston, who stayed in Nigeria for many years, found all manner of signs of Judaism among the Nigerian people. There are certain customs which rather point the Levitic influence at a more or less remote period. This is suggested in the underlying ideas concerning sacrifice and in the practice of circumcision. The language also bears parallels with Hebrew idiom. With regard to the encounter between some Nigerian groups and Judaism, one must consider the recurring theme of the Hamitic hypothesis. Among early anthropologists, colonists, and missionaries from the 19th century, one popular suggestion was that the Igbo and Yoruba, or at least major features of their religion and culture, originated from Egypt. For example, Talbot asserted the statues which reached their greatest development in the Mibari temples of the Igbo, though in clay and most primitive, are similar in feeling and design to some found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Tutankhamun. White supremacist versions of the Hamitic myth examined above maintained their vivid influence up to the mid-20th century. As recently noted by the historian Philip Zacharnouk, Nigerian authors of the late 19th century and early 20th century, in rethinking their history, adopted the interactions of these influences and accepted the degeneration of their ancestors from more advanced civilizations, particularly as a result of migrations from Egypt. In the 1960s, an Irish colonial administrator, Robert Collis, who spent several years in Nigeria, saw a clear difference between the Igbo and other West Africans, explicitly evoking stereotypes about the Jews. There is no doubt that the Igbo men are the hardest workers in Nigeria, and their women among the most charming and the most intelligent, and have shown themselves to have IQs as high as any race or group anywhere in the world. Indeed. This theory was involved by the priest and lampoonist J. Olumide Lucas in the 1940s to explain the progressive and intelligent character he attributed to his people. At the beginning of the 20th century, Reverend Samuel Johnson, the first Yoruba historian to write the history of his people, adopted the idea of migration from Nubia through the Arabian Peninsula down to the present territory. According to Johnson, there was no doubt that the language and religion of the Yoruba derived from Upper Egypt. Following this line of thought, S.O. Biobaku claimed in 1955 that the Yoruba originated from Merowe, the ancient kingdom of the Sudan, while Emmanuel Ugulu asserted the Jewish origin of the small tribe of Asan. In his critical book about the lost tribes, Godbey established that in the 1930s, colonial cultural preconceptions were adopted by 400 families of around 2,000 Yoruba Jews in the district of Ondo in southwestern Nigeria, 100 miles east of Abeokuta and 900 miles from Timbuktu. Their Muslim or fetishist neighbors, their Muslim or voodoo fetishist neighbors gave them the name of Emoyokwem, that is, foreign people. This community claimed a Semitic descent, called themselves by the Hebrew name of Bnei Ephraim, children of Ephraim, and asserted that their Moroccan ancestors were expelled from oasis to oasis by Muslim persecution beyond Timbuktu. However, the information about the existence of Emoyokwem Jews appears to rely heavily on a novel by Lobagola, An African Savage's Own Story, which was rather successful in the white supremacy 1930s. Lobagola, who gave lectures in the United States, told of his surprising adventures as a black Jew from Dahomey who left the African bush for modern civilization. He wrote in his autobiographical novel, "I already said that my people observed the main practices of Judaism because we believe that we descend from Jews who came to Africa many centuries ago. We have the Torah, the laws of Moses, and we follow it to the letter. We celebrate Passover, Pentecost, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkoth. We practice circumcision and we obey 7 rabbis." The claim to ancient links with Hebrews seems shared even by some Christian Igbo. For example, Uchi P. Ikeibe, an Igbo Christian minister, wrote a booklet in 1999 on the origin of the Igbo people and posited that Igbo are Israelites. He backed his position by citing the book of Olaudah Equiano, an Igbo captured by slave merchants in the 18th century who was transported to England and sold there. Equiano, considered an icon by the Igbo, educated himself and wrote the interesting narratives of the life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa the African, in which he suggested that the Igbo were one of the lost tribes of Israel. More recently, Sir N. Okafor Ogbaji, the coordinator of King Solomon Shepherd Federation, an African American Jewish association in New Jersey, claimed that the Aro Igbo of eastern Nigeria are Bani Israel, which they are. He published a genealogical chart tracing the ancestry of the Aro Igbo from Adam to Arodi, the founder of the Aro lineage, and attempted to demonstrate quite interesting similarities in the morphosyntactic and semantic structures of the Igbo and ancient Hebrew. Okay, the convergence of these conceptions probably contributed to the self-delineation of some Nigerian groups as Jews by heritage. In a context where the idea of a Hebrew origin was implicitly present, when did the Igbos' claim for Judaism arise? Analogies between the experience of Igbo and of Jews have produced other associations. Even before the economic cooperation that existed between the Igbo and Israel prior to the Biafra War, 1967-1970, there was a widespread sentiment among the Igbo that they were part of the Jewish people. Suffering episodes in the Jewish past assumed particular significance for the Igbo, who suffered persecution during the Biafra-Nigeria War. When in May 1967 in southern Nigeria, the Igbo proclaimed their independence, the Nigerian government immediately put a blockade in place. A civil war began that lasted for 2.5 years and killed more than 1 million people. During the conflict, journalists used references to genocide and holy war to arouse international consciousness and circulated pictures of emaciated children to denounce famine used as a political weapon. In 1970, when the war ended, the Nigerian finance commissioner forced the Igbo who had money in the banks to accept 20 Nigerian pounds of lieu of whatever amounts they had. The Abandoned Properties Edict of 1973 which enacted the seizure of Igbo's land properties by non-Igbo Nigerians, was likened to Nazi confiscation of Jews' possessions. Since the Igbo have regularly compared their experience to the modern experience of the Jews, this induced one member of the Abuja community to say, "I have noticed that when the Igbo talk about Biafra, they veer into discussions on Israel and Zionism. Unconsciously, our people have identified the return, Teshuvah, repentance or return to God, Judaism, as the panacea for what some perceive as injustice from the British Nigerians." The dire circumstances of the Igbo's post-war period were made even more precarious by famine and political instability. Since the oil boom of the 1970s, Nigeria's economy has been in crisis. Without extraordinary help, the Igbo cannot, under existing conditions, generate to access to well-being in the future. In such a dire situation, where food, shelter, and education are unaffordable for the majority of the population, the symbolic recognition they find by identifying their experience as a Jew, as a Jewish one, also offers a possibility of inestimable outside help. After the ravages of the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism and the rejection of ancestral customs, the failure of Biafran aspirations, and repeated persecutions, the Igbo are in a quest for identity today. The historical experience and suffering of the Jewish people and the creation of the fake state of Israel seem to offer them a workable paradigm. Today, one should not expect to encounter the majority of Igbo practicing Judaism. Most belong to various Christian churches and know relatively little about Judaism, but have a deep sentiment that the Igbo come from Israel. Every congregation represented a way of connecting with Judaism, partly due to interactions with Western Jewry. Some of the larger and significant communities include the Gihon Hebrew Center, founded in September 2004 in Abuja, which could be described as somewhat orthodox, and the Tikva Israel congregation, led by Sar Habapuk, Habakkuk, which could be described as conservative. Since 2003, Kalanu and American and Israeli visitors have donated Torahs, books, and prayer items to the Gihon Hebrew Center, which now has its own synagogue and library in Abuja and has created an academy where the Hebrew language and basic Judaism are studied. The community now carefully observes all the formalities and prayers of the Jewish services and customs. From a questionnaire I sent to the Gihon community in May 2005 concerning the oral tradition of the families, it appears outside a palpable thirst for Jewish studies and life that almost all of the respondents are convinced of their Jewish heritage and consider that they grew up with the idea of their Jewish origin, even if they formally practice Christianity. Overall, the questionnaire showed that the majority of the community members consider that the traditional Igbo religion, which existed before the arrival of Christianity, was like Judaism, and they explained their reconnection to Judaism as akin to a revelation. As concerns their expectations with respect to their Jewish affiliation, almost all the respondents expressed Jewish aspirations, such as the return to Torah, the desire to visit Jerusalem, and the desire to reclaim a heritage that has been denied them for so long. At the end of June 2005, with the support of the American Jewish World Service and Kulanu, an American rabbi from Illinois, Rabbi Rosen, visited the Igbo in Nigeria for an entire month. A large number of the Igbo, including Sabbatharians, informed by word of mouth of the rabbi's arrival, came from far away to attend his lectures, to hear his comments on the Bible and his teachings on the Torah. The rabbis led or participated in the services of Sabbath in the 3 synagogues of Abuja, and also worked with the Igbo who had begun Teshuvah, repentance, return. According to Rebbe Gorin, as many as 10,000 people might be interested in a halakhic conversion. The visit of Rabbi Rebbe Rosen, which was considered a historic event among the Igbo of Nigeria, reinforced the Igbo's Jewish identity elsewhere, as indicated by the following email sent by an Igbo living in England to the Abuja community. I must thank you for everything, especially on the role you are playing for the reawakening of the truth on the Igbo Jews. This is a great achievement that only the great minds will discover. In recent years, as access to information via the internet has grown, the Igbo's Jewish identity is acquiring new pieces every day, like an expanding jigsaw puzzle. The typological association of Igbo as descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel has been recently sustained by the discovery in the region of Aguleri of an onyx stone with the name Gad engraved in a form of ancient Hebrew. This is believed to be the confirmation of Jewish ancestral origin, according to an interpretation of Exodus 39:6, Exodus chapter 39, verse 6. And they wrought onyx stones enclosed in ouches and ouches of gold, graven as signets are graven with the names of the children of Israel. Various recent events have provided synergies and connections between Jewish African Americans and Igbo. The established model of African American Jewish communities who claim a Judaic descent can only facilitate and speed up the current process of religious identity elaboration of Igbo. In August 2003, in the United States, on the small island of St. Simons, Georgia, a Chicago-based group of Nigerians from the Igbo tribe and others from Haiti and Canada met to mark the sanctification of the place where Igbo men threw themselves into the sea rather than live as slaves. As part of the event, a member of the Chicago organization, Bruce Dan Judah Carey, presented a paper on the history of the Igbo, Nidi, and Hebrew people. Okpala Ezinri Chukwu Emeka the first, Onyeso, who represented the high priest of Igbo land, gave a lecture on the conditions of the Igbo people. Under the current government of Nigeria. He wore a red kippa, and a talith, described by the Kulanu article's author as the garment worn by all Igbo priests when they officiate a cultural ceremony. These well-known attributes of Judaism being clearly given by an external observer the status of ancestral Igbo religious attire. In January 2006, the Institute for Jewish and Community Research and Beth Shalom B'nai Zaken Ethiopian Hebrew Congregation, San Francisco, sponsored a trip to Nigeria. They were represented by individuals involved in the Alliance of Black Jews, such as Rebbe Kappers Fournier. The purpose of this trip was to visit the leaders of the various Igbo communities who claimed to be of Jewish descent and to ascertain their interest to joining the recently formed American-based Pan-African Jewish Alliance. The Igbo Jews are now awaiting DNA testing that would find the Cohen DNA marker in both Igbo and Yoruba groups. While much more historical research needs to be done, it will be interesting to see what the long-term effects are on this community, in particular if or when the impact of scientific findings intervenes in their narratives. Okay, now let's read more on the house of Israel of Ghana, of Canaan. Like the Igbo of Nigeria, another group in the southwestern corner of Ghana, the house of Israel of Sefwi Wiyaso and Sefwi Sui is a new Jewish community. Sefwi Wiyaso is a village of 4,000 inhabitants where there is a new synagogue and a core group of around 800 people practicing Judaism. In 1976, a Ghanaian man named Aaron Ahotre Kiarafa had a vision. He spoke with the spirits, who inspired him to believe that he and his fellow villagers were actually descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. According to Toa Kiarafa, before the arrival of Christian missionaries, the Sefwi people had specific traditions deriving from Judaism. They strictly adhered to rest on the Shabbat Saturday, followed dietary restrictions that forbade them to eat pork, circumcised boys, and required women circumcise boys and require women to go into isolation during their menstrual period, and so on. The founders of the community suggested that their ancestors originated from Jews in North Africa who had crossed the Sahara Desert centuries ago, perhaps from Timbuktu ending up in the Ivory Coast. Over time, they lost connections to their Jewish roots, but apparently maintained some Jewish customs. Then the Jewish families of a district of the village called New Adiembra attempted to learn about Jewish practices and began to take Jewish observances very seriously. Excuse me. Nowadays, members of the community say that they embrace Judaism because to them the Old Testament contained more truth than the New Testament. They reject Jesus Christ in all forms and consider themselves to be Jewish, although they would like to convert formally. This Jewish community is unique in Ghana. About 1/3 of Ghana's inhabitants are either Muslim or animist, and neither everyone else is Christian. As in many other countries in West Africa, evangelism has put down firm roots and its fervor seems contagious. Local religions also endure in Ghana and are often practiced in syncretism with the mainstream religions. Traditional cosmology expresses belief in a supreme being referred to by the Akan as Nyame, or by the Iyu as Mau. In pre-colonial times, the area of present-day Ghana comprised a number of independent kingdoms, including Gonja and Dagomba in the north, Ashanti in the interior, and the Fanti states along the coast. Modern Ghana takes its name from the ancient kingdom of Ghana, some 500 miles to the north of present-day Accra, which controlled the gold trade between the mining areas to the south and the Saharan trade routes to the north, and was also the focus for the export trade in Saharan copper and salt. Formed from the merger of the British colony of the Gold Coast and the Togoland Trust Territory in 1957, modern Ghana became the first sub-Saharan country in colonial Africa to gain its independence. History and myths of the origin of modern Ghana are intimately linked. There's also the connection between Ghana and Ethiopia. You can see that these countries are two of the only ones to really have gained independence in Africa after the colonization. So let's proceed. History and myths of the origin of modern Ghana are intimately linked with traditions of the ancient kingdom and biblical texts. Biblical references are found in various West African traditions as the formation of the blacksmith caste, or the famous legend of Ouagadougou, recorded by Charles Monteil, relating to the foundation of the ancient kingdom of Ghana. This tradition tells that the founder of this kingdom was the chief of blacksmiths, Dinga, descending from King Solomon. According to the tradition, when Dinga became blind and was transferring his power, he was tricked by his youngest son in the same way that Isaac tricked Jacob to deprive Esau of his right as the eldest son. Excuse me. Okay. All right. There are different narrations of who Dinga was, but invariably they establish the fact that he was a stranger from afar, probably of white origin. The lengthy components of the story The lengthy components of the story of the exile of the 10 tribes are found in this myth. African scholars consider the legend of Ouagadougou as a condensation of stories which serve as archives for the entire ethnic group. First, there is the long Soninke journey from Yemen or Palestine, then the crossing of North Africa through Egypt, and what is presently the desert up to Adrar and Tagant, and the settlement in the fertile north region of Timbuktu. It must be said that in the specific case of the Smiths, biblical traditions and possible Jewish influences seem to be interrelated to the point that in some regions of Mauritania, for instance, Smiths are called Yehud and Yibro. In Somalia, there was also evidence of the Samanyo, an action by which a father buys back his son from the Ibir and then later receives a blessing which simulates the buying back of the firstborn male child from the Levites, such as described in the book of Numbers, chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. Just give me 1 second. Excuse me. All right. We know that since Al-Idrisi claims were made by Arabic writers of the Middle Ages, that there were Jewish inhabitants in the south of the Kingdom of Ghana. In the 19th century, the notion derived from the Hamitic hypothesis that in this region there were people of non-African extraction was widespread among Europeans due to the magnificent artworks of these regions. Excuse me. Okay, where were we? Okay. I apologize about that. Okay, in the 19th century, the notion derived from the Hamitic hypothesis that in this region there were people of non-African extraction was widespread among Europeans due to the magnificent artworks of these regions. No doubt the mechanism that in the colonial context fostered an imagined Hamitic origin had been active in this region. Thomas E. Bowditch, one of the first Europeans to have close contact with the Ashanti, after observing their customs, religious expressions, laws, architecture, art, and facial features, asserted that they were descendants of the civilized Ethiopians of Herodotus. While speaking of the Ashanti and kindred tribes, Ratzel affirmed without hesitation, there are 12 stocks, the members of which are distributed promiscuously throughout these tribes, however remote they may be in situation or politically separated. This culminated with Frobenius's theories affirming that the artworks of the Yoruba came from Plato's Atlantis. Okay, Atlantis is actually comes from the Atlas Mountains of North Africa and other regions a little bit more west, but see how they kind of perverted there, and were thus essentially Greek. They're reversing it. These opinions were widely shared and conveyed by French anthropologists such as Eugene Pitard, who used anthropometry to claim that the Ashanti had the physical traits of populations that would have migrated from the northeast. In Hebrewisms of West Africa, Williams theorized on the possible contacts between Hebrews and the tribes of West Africa. He even detected traces of Hebrew in the Ashanti's language, beginning with their name, which he broke down into T for children of and Ashan for a city of Judea. Williams also identified a number of Jewish customs in the Ashanti rituals, from wedding rituals to purification ceremonies and menstrual isolation, and noted elements in common between the Ashanti and ancient Hebrews, such as the worship of Ob, the use of Amen, endogamy, marriage between cousins, surnames, and above all, the worship of the Supreme Being. Captain Rattray, the Ashanti District Commissioner, a highly qualified official of the empire who published a number of works about the Ashanti, shared Williams' point of view. I am convinced that the conception in the Ashanti mind of a supreme being has nothing whatever to do with missionary influence, nor could it be ascribed to contact with Christians, or even, I believe, with Mohammedans. In a sense, therefore, it is true that this great supreme being, the conception of whom has been innate in the minds of the Ashanti, is Jehovah of the Israelites. While much more historical research needs to be done, part of the discourse of the new Jewish community in Ghana clearly has strong reminiscences of this background. Okay. Let us see in what context the House of Israel Let us see in what context the House of Israel members' claim of Jewish origin developed. Since the independence in 1957, corruption and internal military strife proved apparently intractable problems. In the 1960s and 1970s, Ghana went through an extended period of instability marked by military rule. By the early 1980s, Ghana's economy was in an advanced state of collapse. A military government under the leadership of Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings came to power and instituted the Economic Recovery Program, the ERP. The effects of the ERP on the domestic economy, however, led to a lowered standard of living for most Ghanaians. Just give me 1 second. Excuse that. Okay, where were we? Okay. Excuse me. I apologize once again on that. Okay. Okay. Give thanks for tuning in. Okay, now let's begin from here. After Tawaki Rafa's death in 1991, it seems that the community had a difficult time, in that some of its members even attended church since they were afraid of being further persecuted. In 1993, David Akonora, a close relation with Toaki Rafa became the primary leader of the House of Israel community and fostered its growth. Akenora then contacted the Ghanaian community of the United States and asked for help from his African American co-religionists who were active in Jewish causes to develop the knowledge of Judaism of the members of the Sefwi Sui community. He appealed for the donation of prayer and Torah books and help in improving their farming activities. Since 1996, following these contacts with Kalanu, teachers and rabbis began to visit the community, teaching its members Hebrew and Torah and bringing with them educational and religious material. The synagogue Tiferet Israel, named after a generous congregation in Des Moines, Iowa, was built. Kulanu helped the community for economic development, and the Sefwi people started a business making embroidered challah covers. More recently, the community receiving a steady flow of Jewish visitors from the worldwide Jewish community. Many have been writing about the community, bringing them to the attention of Jews worldwide. Let's give you another second there. Okay. The story of the Sefwi communities is significant of the typological associations of African peoples with the lost tribes of Israel. Sefwi communities subscribe to the common history of the global dispersion of the Jews among the nations, deriving from the myth of origins of Ghana. Mythical traditions such as the legend of Wagadu brought the Hebrew Bible to life in their African-based practices and had been considered a Jewish heritage within some communities. The group appropriation of Judaism characterized the Hebraic African formation, in which aspects of Old Testament traditions were integrated with African elements. In the 1990s, inspired by Toaki Rafa's vision, the communities of Sefwi Wiaso seemed to consider Judaism as a living religion that they must interpret according to the needs of their community. Their link to Judaism was through a lost Israelite claim associated Their link to Judaism was through a lost Israelite claim associated with millenarian beliefs, which may have been introduced to them through colonialism and Christianity, or alternatively may have been inherited from their indigenous religious beliefs. Recently, following exchanges with the African American diaspora, it seems that the community's discourse on identity is evolving. A certain Daniel Baden of Ghanaian origin, who lived in the United States, went back to Ghana in 1996 and visited the community. He introduced himself as follows: I am a Jew who was born in Ghana. My family's oral history says that our ancestors are from Ethiopia and that our families originally had come from Israel. As a child, I heard many times that we were of one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Like many Ethiopians, we moved a lot. Hundreds of years ago, to flee the conquerors of Ethiopia, my ancestors migrated west, eventually settling in Ghana. When I heard from Kalanu about the village of Sefwi Wiasu, I was sure that my family must somehow be responsible for the village's turn toward our faith. I grew up always aware of my Jewish heritage. My father, Emmanuel, had learned much about modern Judaism from a friend, Rabbi Weiss, a Polish refugee who lived in Ghana in the late 1940s and early 1950s. My family in Ghana possesses various Jewish ritual objects that are quite old, including Talatot, Stars of David, and prayers written in Amharic, the Ethiopian language. I moved to the United States in 1979. I joined the congregation Oshei Shalom in Laurel, Maryland, where Rabbi Gary Fink has served as my spiritual teacher. I regularly attend Shabbat services, keep a kosher home, and I am active in Jewish causes. We already know that African Americans gave rise to myths of origin in which Ethiopia became a common birthplace. Recent remarks of Baden signal the perpetuation of the Ethiopia Judaism Africa amalgamation, as it was constituted among African American Jewish groups in the 1950s. Hitherto, the community of Ghana was not particularly connected to Ethiopia as regards its myth of origin. The visit of Baden mythologized Ethiopia as a place of origin for African Jews. In claiming ties to a Jewish lineage whose roots are in Africa, Baden provided the Sefwi community with the assertion that Africa was the geographical foundation of Judaism, the land that had produced the Jewish religion. Baden's intervention offers a good example of a subsystem of reciprocal representation between the new Jewish community in Ghana and African American Jews in Ghanaian ancestry. Give me 1 second. Yes, I. Yes, I. In bringing to Ghana the version of the standing myth of origin of African American Jews, Baden went full circle by providing a new piece in the symbolical identity process of the community of Ghana, or Canaan, another name for Canaan. You can do more research on Ghana and Canaan and also see the etymological similarities between the two words of Ghana and Canaan, or Canaan. And you can see the link between the two when one does further research and gets guided by the Spirit. All right, so we're going to stop here. We're going to pause, and we're going to pick up later on the Tutsi Hebrews of Havila. Give thanks once again for tuning in. Salam.